Thank you. I want to welcome everybody to Northwest Indiana Green Drinks, and this is our 12th year of doing this. And we're very excited to be with you for this long, and we've had so many wonderful presentations over the years. And Em will talk a little bit more about our presentation tonight. I always want to welcome who our sponsors are, and of course, it's Northwest Indiana Green Drinks, Save the Dunes, Michigan City Sustainability Commission, and 219 Green Connect. And then every month we have hosts, and our host from 95.1 FM AM 1420 WIMS radio, which is a regional radio station. I like to mention the organization that our presenter works with and for, so that's Little Village Environmental Justice Organization. And I'll have to say, this is not the first time I've heard of this group. They're very active in their community, and they stand up for a lot of individuals that otherwise would not have a voice in their communities. So thank you for that. Michigan City Pride has joined us as a host, and then also PFLAG Michigan City. So I want to thank all of those people, because without this collaborative effort, none of this would ever happen for our community. So thank you much. Oh, also July, don't look for us, because that is our customary summer break. So we won't be doing this in July, but we'll be back August strong and refreshed and back here for you. Thank you. Em?
Thank you, Nancy. I'm sorry I got too excited. I started before, put the carrot before the horse or whatever. But okay, thank you everybody for joining us both on Zoom and Facebook Live or wherever you're tuning in from. Tonight we are so thrilled to welcome Nateo here to present their Nature Beyond the Binary program. I have heard this program many times and loved it every single time. So I'm really excited to see and hear how it goes today. So Nateo is a farmer, horticulturalist, and community land steward who's been working with plants for the last 12 years. They study soil biology, plants, and lecture on queer ecology. The focus of their work is to study the relationships between soil, land, people, and queerness. We're so thrilled to have you, Nateo. I will hand it over. Like I said, if anyone has questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. And at the end, we'll go over them and open up the chat for people. So, Nateo?
Hey folks, thank you so much to Save the Dunes and Green Drinks for the invitation. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Cool. All right. Okay, cool. Hey folks, my name is Nateo. I use they, them pronouns. I'm gonna do my best to speak slowly for anyone who might find it helpful to utilize the closed caption feature on any recording or streaming platform that they're using. Before we get started and get really into it, it feels really important to thank everyone for being here today. As a commitment to listening to what's going on in the world, I took a break from facilitating workshops, and today marks a return to sharing space in that type of way. It doesn't go without saying that there is a lot going on in the world worth lending our attention and action to. So it means a lot that you all specifically would take the time to be here and offer yourselves to the very vulnerable act of listening to other perspectives with an open mind. Also, if you're into this brief talk today, there will be a like 2 hour, hour and a half iteration of this that goes into much, much, much more depth next Saturday, the 15th at the Morton Arboretum in Lisle, Illinois. So just in case you're really into this. With that, sometimes being in this position, orating, makes people forget that you're fallible. So it feels valuable to let you all know a little bit about who I am and how I identify. I am not an academic. I would also like to point out that I'm not an institutionally accredited professional in any field, and I don't have a desire to be. And there will, without a doubt, be things that in collecting for this talk that I miss. Um, this offering today isn't being presented in an effort to attempt to know or capture everything. It was really created through a need to remind those of us who defy gender norms and those of us who deny variance that by nature standards, variance belongs here. And so do the people and living things that embody it. So a very vulnerable plea from me is that we use the information that we gather today to call attention to our currently socially constructed awarenesses so that we can remediate them to be less violent and oppressive than they have been. So first, I wanted to open this talk with a review of science as it's been taught and normalized, because we have to know where we've been to understand how we can work to shift our understanding to integrate all of the land's organisms and their natural embodiments. And folks, today we're leaning all the way into critiquing the field of science. And my personal contention with science is that it's a field that since its origin has been mainly a cisgender and heteronormative dominated field, which means that by transitive property, right, it's encouraged kind of a bias around the dissemination of research related to sex, gender, and biology. And unfortunately, a large amount of the scientific methods and just research that we've gotten to this point has been formulated by the limitations of those identities. The practice of taking an entire species and categorizing it, categorizing that existence down to their organisms, their male and female for reproduction, it's not only remiss, it's reductionist, and it doesn't account for the myriad of ways that organisms exist. So a lot of our understandings and perceptions about sex and gender expression has turned into like a socially and culturally influenced obligation to reproduce and not necessarily an accurate reflection of how organisms represent themselves in nature. So when we hear or have heard this like nature is male and female, man and woman, the existence of literally all living things on Earth kind of shows that nature doesn't solely conform to two expressions. And I'm so super confident that we'll probably never discover the entirety of how nature, plants, people, and animals can embody themselves. Can I actually, is it possible to get a Save the Dunes MC host or someone from Save the Dunes to read this part?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and read it. When I'm saying move beyond the gender binary, what I'm actually insisting is that we are far more tremendous, expansive, celestial than could ever be contained by a body, and that actually some of the most powerful or inspiring earth-shattering ways to exist in the world will never be visible. Not because they're not here, but rather because we don't yet have the tools to decipher, understand, and tabulate them.
This quote comes from a queer theory educator, poet, writer who I really admire, whose name is Alak Manan, talking about queerness and unruly beauty on a podcast called For the Wild. And I hope that it gets us in the spirit to take in the rest of the information that we're going to learn today. So the reality is there's so much being published and being made available on the field of queer ecology as every day passes. This particular little brief talk we're having today was inspired by so many artists and scholars and researchers, writers, community organizers, and friends, and most importantly, inspired through observations of land and all of its kin. This was originally written some years ago and has been revisited quite a few times since then. And even still, it cannot possibly encapsulate everything within the study of queer theory and queer ecology. So I hope we're not expecting that today. We have less than an hour, so like not everything, not today. But with that, here are some working definitions that we're going to be using today. Actually, yeah, there we go. So Tiffany Santos, at the time of writing this definition on queer ecology, was a youth coordinator and organizer with an organization called the Community Health Initiative. And we'll be using the way she defines queer ecology. So Tiffany wrote, queer ecology as a praxis that works to disprove the misconceptions of human nature as naturally occurring aggression, apathy, and disrespect. One anchored in domination, violence, and excess with an objective to permeate inferiority. She further says, queer ecology highlights this normalized attitude in our societal structures and its inflexibility as a combination of colonization, patriarchy, and speciesism. Supremacism, human supremacism, has led to the exploitation of the environment and the lives of people who live in areas where natural resources like herbs, water and minerals are found. Now, queer ecology is informed by queer theory. And for the purpose of today, we'll be using Aisha Ibram's definition of queer theory. She says that queer theory emphasizes the fluidity and the diversity of identities and challenges the idea of fixed categories. It aims to create a more accepting society for all individuals, human and non-human. Now, we're saying the word queer a lot. And words mean things, go figure. So when we say queer today, we're actually using that word to denote and relate, important there, relate to anything that does not correspond to predictated societal norms. Oh, this is, okay, yeah, there we go. Little, it's okay. So the works of Bruce Benjamin, who wrote a book called Biological Exuberance, Joan Roughgarden, Myra J. Hurd, all unfold on how many scientists have refused to acknowledge any kind of behavior in animals or nature that could even hint at the possibility of queer expression or expression outside of what is considered to be normal. Even still, in the current day, if you look up queer behavior in animals, there are still some scientists and writers and articles that explain queer behavior in nature as A, something that's wrong with the environment or the animal, like something is not okay. B, those organisms are just practicing for real copulation, which means copulation solely for the purpose of creating offspring and not necessarily for pleasure or recreation. And lastly, they refer to transness or queerness as deception, in that a transition's utility is to deceive other species and not necessarily as a tool for continued survival, which in all cases, it always is. And Benjamin and Hurd both identified in their works that one of the reasons that queer ecological studies haven't been widely disseminated is because many scientists who were predominantly cisgender and heterosexual feared risking their reputations, their credibility, their academic or institutional positions. And of course, they didn't want to, if they were male, they didn't want to risk their identity as heterosexual males. And I just want to take a second here to highlight that it's this same like heteronormative culture and narrative in the fields of science and scientific observation that perpetuate this belief, right, that non-human animals or organisms are not complex enough to develop their own cultures or practices of pleasure. And we can't say for certain that they don't. And ultimately, if we think that the non-human world is incapable of building culture for itself, it kind of serves to encourage that fallacy of like human superiority that Tiffany Santos mentioned in her definition of queer ecology. Joan Roughgarden, who is the writer of Evolution's Rainbow, says it's great, but she says, quote, The scientific silence on homosexuality alone in animals amounts to a cover-up, deliberate or not. Therefore, scientists are professionally responsible for refuting claims that homosexuality is unnatural, end quote. And so with that being said, I'm about to give you a very non-academic current explanation of sex as it's been understood and not necessarily, and not as it's embodied in reality. So what we've been taught is that biological sex is predicated as a binary. Organisms have either one of two distinct genetic codes or chromosomes, which plays out like this. If you're XY, that's a male, and males make testosterone. And if you're XX, that's a female, and females make testosterone. Or make estrogen, and that's it. That's all we got. But as biology and life and adaptation would have it, that wonderfully curated, simple little plan kind of got thrown into a flaming trash can a little bit. In that living organisms that have any living organism that has sex characteristics, AKA hormones or chromosomes that fall outside of those categories, male and female, are considered intersex. So this is a whole third category. And go figure, there are a great many ways that intersex characteristics can manifest in living organisms. There can be manifestations of XXY, there can be manifestations of triple XY, and in turn, some expressions can manifest in just one X chromosome. If y'all are into the Scientific American, in 2018, they wrote an article that there could be even more variation than that. Since the 1990s, researchers have actually identified over 25 genes involved in sex differences just within the human genome. Which encourages that biology is actually very complex and is more likely to exist and express itself on a spectrum. Dr. Sarah S. Richardson argues that sex is a spectrum trait, actually, and it requires a multitude of genetic factors. She also wrote a book called Sex Itself, which unfolds a little bit on the history and science behind the widespread understanding that males and females are genetically contrary. And to tie it back to history, right, it turns out that this XY, XX science came out in the 1960s when a lot of gender roles were being challenged. And, you know, again, scientists presented this research to prove the belief that women were inferior and therefore needed to conform to a more domestic and passive role in society. And, you know, what's also important to mention here is that like every body attempts to produce testosterone and every body attempts to produce estrogen. It's a coexisting hormone exchange that happens in every body unless there are other factors that that happen that cause that to not be a thing. But outside of that, right, and outside of that, 99.9% of human genomes, meaning cell structure, cell nuclei, cell or chromosomes, DNA, genes, are identical in humans. So the science of nature's expression, as it's been told to us, has given us the ideology for what our story on this planet is supposed to be. And ideology plays a role in informing how we're supposed to engage with one another and our surroundings. And ultimately, the research and data that we've been given about how organisms express their biology has created a lot of the arguments that we've heard against folks who don't or who may not conform to heterosexual key terms. And at some point, I'm sure we've all heard, well, blank just isn't natural. And that statement inspires inquiry for me And I tend to ask folks who say that, natural relative to what? Like, what's your point of reference? Natural relative to flowers, ocean organisms, microbiology, earthworms? What are we talking about? And I'm going to digress here. I promise it's related. I don't think it would be a very good topic if it wasn't. But for a really long time, primates, including bonobo monkeys, have been used as the apex example of what the most human representation is in nature. And that's a little problematic in itself, because we should be able to relate to organisms and ecology, even if it doesn't resemble us or something that we are used to. But we identify with them, right? And with stories of their societies, of primates. However, bonobo monkeys are not only a matriarchy, right? But a great deal of those primates in that society engage in homosexuality. And it's not to reproduce, but it's to maintain peace within their community. So the way they engage with each other is meant to support the repression of violence. It allows for expressions of pleasure. And a lot of scientists and researchers who have observed them have understood that they do that to facilitate, again, peace in their community, harmony. So if we tend to use primates in nature to relate to what is normal for us as humans, and then we use that to build the framework of how we're supposed to behave with one another and our surroundings, then I would say that maybe we haven't come as close as we had hoped to embodying the lessons that exist in nature. And you know, some days that feels like an understatement. But Catriona Sandelans, editor and contributor to the book Queer Ecologies, which was shown earlier, is credited with saying one of my personal favorite things of all time. They say, quote, "Heterosexuality is not an appropriate benchmark for ecological research." And again, my personal contention is that any attempt to keep heterosexuality as the predominant understanding of how ecology itself must function and express is a practice in reductionism. And I would like to believe that we're at a point in time when we're realizing we can be a little bit more expansive and creative in our search for information about what we're being told is natural. Ultimately, we're connected to nature. We share adaptive characteristics of non-human animals, and we need to allow variant biological expressions in nature and in us to matter. This is a concept that indigenous cultures understood and valued, right? Like, you are my other me, regardless of what you are. So in our search to pursue and integrate a more compassionate praxis, we have to ask ourselves, where does our collective knowledge of nature come from? Whose voices and ideals are being centered? Who are the storytellers, right? Like, who's telling the stories about nature? And is the story being told promoting or hurting nature? I love what Sandelan says here, in that we sometimes forget that the knowledge systems we use to conceptualize the world are not necessarily exactly the same as the world we're conceptualizing. And so what can help us remember that the guidelines we've been given to understand the natural world are actually not the same as the natural world we're actually experiencing? And I think about this often. My answer, much like land, feels like it's in a constant state of transition. But there's a point that has stayed. And it's that we have to begin to nurture a trophic disposition to change and difference, right? Trophic means feeding or nourishing. difference and change in ecology can be relegated to the act of stewarding biodiversity. Biodiversity is defined as variability among living organisms from all sources. This includes human and non-human ecosystems. It includes variance that is both sexual and genetic within organisms, between organisms, and of ecosystems. And so if the definition of biodiversity is requiring us to assess nature in a way that's multidimensional, again, variability being the key word, we need to begin accepting that variations not only occur within sexuality and biological expression, but again, they're natural embodiments of life. Right? A variation is defined as change, and change is the act or instance of becoming different. Jennifer Terry is another writer who I really appreciate on this topic. And she said, quote, "Animals and nature help us tell stories about ourselves, especially when it comes to matters of sex and sexuality, but they're always going to be shaped by historical, disciplinary, and larger cultural contexts." So I know maybe we're not in a place where we're like, wow, yes, unlearning decades worth of internalized messaging about science. It just seems so sensible. But there's actually so many ways and so many encouragements that nature is offering us to reinforce that it's not exclusively a binary entity. It's actually kind of amazing that in our daily lives, we're confronted with so many examples of why we can't continue to refer to nature as a dichotomy of male and female only. Many embodiments of plants, right? Plants that we're familiar with, cherries, tomatoes, peas, roses, lilies, to name a few, express their biology as intersex. Again, meaning that these are living organisms that possess characteristics of both female and male sexes, aka pollen carrying and pollen receiving flowers. And there's a really wide variety of manifestations of that. However, if flowers don't really get you going, that's okay. We're gonna jump into some other queer nature examples. Some might be in your own backyard. Well, like more like your region, not in your little backyard. It's like your region is like say or like the dunes. So, okay. So this is one way that we can look at a gender variation, right? This is a gynandromorph. Gynandromorphs are cases in which tissues of both male and female identity. And again, if you ever wanted to find a way to refer to male and female identities, what science is trying to say is like basically like sperm carrying and sperm receiving, right? Like genetic information carrying, genetic information receiving. So that's a different way that you can refer to that if that makes you feel more comfortable. Or if that's just like, again, you're trying to clear it up and you're trying to refer to things in a more non-binary way. We're just using that because it's a good entry level for some folks. But again, you can always stretch the way that you identify organisms within nature. But so yeah, so right, male and female are found mixed in the same animal. And this happens through genetic departures where body cells will actually lose their ability to determine sex, and they will adopt the opposite identity. So in species with very obvious appearances, like this morpho butterfly, this variation manifests on the wings. So that's why you're seeing all these variations of wings on one insect. This specific manifestation of queerness in nature, right, of a non-binary organism, gynandromorphy or morphism, is observed to occur not just in butterflies, it occurs in crustaceans, it occurs in birds, and it occurs in other insects. There we go. So this deviates from a traditional embodiment of what we understand a flower to be. This is the ghost pipe. It is a non-photosynthesizing plant. It means that it has no chlorophyll. Ghost pipe is completely white because it gets its nutrients by parasitizing tree roots via a fungus. It's rare in that it's apparently it's only found between June and September. I've never caught one because apparently it only blooms for 1 week a year, and for the other 51 weeks, it spends underground. Sounds like a great way to live your life. They probably have a lot of common with cicadas, to be honest, but yeah, so again, this is a way, this is an embodiment that deviates from what we traditionally believe a flower to be, right? When we think of a flower, we think of a very specific organism. We think of an organism that is green. We think of an organism that has a bright colored flower. We think of an organism that blooms for weeks at a time. So that is our traditionally held view of a flower. But here is an organism, a flower, right, that is very much deviating from our traditional understanding of what something is. Again, like Sandalan says, right, like we have this guide for what we're conceptualizing this thing to be, but the experience we're having is actually much different than that. So here is a really great example of a sex or sexuality variation. I love that this kind of like points to a like non-monogamous reproduction relationship. So this is a pollen grain that has been magnified like 3,500 times. It's a pretty significant magnification. But so when we think of pollination, right, it's pollen grains or sperm cells, right, are being delivered to germinate and land on another flower's sexual organs. And the methodology, right, is that it's carried there by either wind or animal couriers. So it's a form of fertilization and copulation that actually enlists the aid of a third party. So you're having multiple organisms from different kingdoms, right, all kind of like get together to make sure that they perform this quite literally life-giving action, which again is contrary to the belief that reproduction is strictly an endeavor of two parties. This is actually the pollen grain of a poplar tree. I feel like it's important to name that because I'm sure we've probably never seen pollen from a poplar tree, but yes. So here's a way that we are kind of seeing a variant social structure, right? Or a social structure that is different from what we're used to seeing. We're used to seeing social structures that are patriarchies, right? They're led by men. And this is a honeybee hive. So in a honeybee hive, all the bees are female, right? A beehive has the social structure of a matriarchy. And life centers around the queen bee. On average, she'll live 2 to 3 years compared to non-birthing bees, aka males, which are called drones. And they only live around 6 to 8 weeks. The drones do not have stingers like their female counterparts. And their primary role is to mate with a fertile queen. As far as the drones go, they'll either die while mating or they'll be expelled from the hive when winter sets in. There's also more than one gender expression of female within the society, right? Because you have the drones, which are quote unquote the worker bees, and then you have the queen bee. So you're seeing multiple gender expressions here too. This is quite possibly one of my favorites. It's an example of a transition in nature. And again, a transition in nature is not in service to deception, it's in service to survival, right? Again, a transition in nature is always in service to survival. But this is a variety of ginger called, oh man, this second name, the binomial nomenclature on this plant is just like so intense. But this type of ginger is from Southwest Asia, and it's called Alpina blepharocalyx. So this plant, interestingly enough, can switch its flowers from male or pollen carrying flowers to female or pollen receiving flowers, depending on the time of day. So basically, morning, woke up with pollen carrying flowers, afternoon, woke up with pollen receiving flowers. And this trait in flowers where they change, right, their flower structure from pollen receiving to pollen carrying is called flexostyle. So again, they're able to be flexible in terms of how their right, how their organs are presented. Again, for survival, or their embodiments are expressed for survival. Here's another example. So this is asexual reproduction, and this is the prickly pear cactus. We know this, right? We know this one. We've seen it. We know who this is. But pads from the prickly pear cactus can detach from the parent plant. And when they do that, they take root, which forms an entirely new plant. And it does not require any type of exchange from pollen producing to pollen receiving flowers to do that. Right? The cutting just falls and it grows on its own and it creates a completely genetic copy of its parent. This process is pretty common for this type of plant, whether it's native or not native, prickly pear cactus. Okay, so I don't even know what to call this. I did not know that this was a thing. I got really excited when I found it. But this is a bitter oyster mushroom, which according to the Dunes Learning Center is the brightest bioluminescent mushroom in the area. It's commonly found on decaying logs. It glows neon green. On the gills of the mushroom, I don't even know. I don't know. I think this is just cool. Like that's amazing. But yeah, so again, but this is like you think of a mushroom, you don't think it's gonna be glowing green, you know, and then you take a hike in the forest and you see a green glowing mushroom, and that is not your regular like Bella mushroom. So again, we have this image of what we think mushrooms should be doing. I have no expectations about mushrooms. They completely go beyond my understanding of organisms, but I love them and appreciate them no less. But this is really cool. Again, this is something that apparently exists in the dunes. So that's really cool. But we're gonna do a little exercise, y'all, if you're ready. If you want to take a little stretch, you know, drink some water. I think I'm gonna drink a little bit of water right now. Give me a second. Okay, great. So yeah, I love it. I love seeing the water breaks. Thank you. Thank you for taking care of you. So yes, we've been saying queer this whole time. We've been saying queer, we've been saying variant. And right, our understanding at this point is that if something is queer, it means that it departs from what is normal. And we saw some examples of queer organisms that live right here, or right there, over there, where y'all are. I'm in Chicago, but that live over there in the dunes. And I'm curious, right? Like I want to learn from you all, what are some other ways that the dune ecology deviates from what you consider to be normal? I just want to flex this stat for y'all really quick that apparently the dunes is the fourth most biodiverse park out of 423 national park sites. So I know that there is some otherworldly stuff happening over there, and I would love to hear from any of y'all about what that's all about. But with that, thank you so much for listening to me speak for an extended amount of time. Yeah, I would love to hear from y'all. Like, what are some other ways that the dune ecologies is just like out here being not what you would think a traditional anything would be?
Nope, that was Save the Dunes internet that went ahead and just dropped out midway. I'm so sorry. Are you there?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, we're back. Go ahead. Sorry, the fourth most biodiverse park in the area is the last thing I heard on my end.
Oh, yeah. So I was just curious to hear from the audience, right? Of what are some other ways that, right, the dune ecology deviates from what's considered normal, considering that it is the fourth most biodiverse park out of 423 national park sites. That's a lot. To be fourth out of 423, yeah, that's pretty cool. But yeah, I would love to hear from y'all about what are some things that you all experience in the dunes that are just like out of this world. I mean, this picture is a great example, right? Like you're seeing a, what is this, like a little lagoon swamp in the middle of sand? Like what is what? Okay, yes. Okay, Isabel.
The first thought that comes to my mind is the cottonwood trees. So the cottonwood trees can grow even if the majority of it is covered completely in sand. So if it can, there can be like trees that are like 15 feet tall, and like the majority of that's covered in sand, but it can still grow as long as some of it's still out. It just keeps on growing. It's really cool.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know that. That's so cool because it's like, right, you would think that sand would like give to the weight of the tree, but the tree is treating anyway. That's amazing. Wow, that's a fact, like nerd fact that I feel like I'm gonna use. So thank you so much, Isabel, for that. That was great. Yeah, feel free to contribute anything else. You can also throw stuff into the chat, y'all.
You know me, my favorite fact about the fluidity of the dunes is that our sand dunes are constantly moving, constantly taking different shapes, constantly being, you know, at the hands of wind and water and all those other things, but they still seem to create the ecosystems and ecologies that they need to, live regardless of how changeable they may be.
Wow, that's really cool. That's like when you think about that, right? Like the dune that you saw like a couple weeks ago is not the same dune that you'll see. Like what? Oh my goodness,
Yep.
that's so cool. That's so cool. That's so cool. We are gonna have time for questions, I think,
Yep.
Nancy. Okay, cool. But I would love to hear more facts about dunes if you all feel in like you're in a place where you can share.
One of the elusive things for me in the dunes, there's something that's called the dunes strawberry plant, but it's not known for its berries. It's known for its beautiful tiny white flowers. And this plant is so delicate that if you see it, it's like a rare treat. And usually it's found around the blowouts that is right next to the lake shore where the wind has, blown out the sand and created these, round hollow areas. And I've only seen this plant one time. So it's very elusive and very hard to find. And when I talk to the biologists and the plant experts in the area, nobody seems to know anything about this very elusive plant. So that's my contribution for this evening.
Wow, that's amazing. I almost strive to be like that strawberry plant, and I too hope to one day be elusive. And when you ask people about me, no one will know anything like that. Yeah, that would be right. We're getting there. We're getting there. We're getting there. Wow, that's so cool. Oh my goodness. Wow, wow. I feel like I need to spend a lot more time with the dunes. This is really cool. Anybody else? Anybody else feel like sharing a really cool, like wild dune fact? If not, I'm cool. If we, how much time do we have for questions?
About 10 minutes.
So,
Yeah, just about 10 minutes. I don't have any comments or questions on the chat end, but if anyone in the Zoom here has chat comments or questions, feel free to you can come off mute or raise your hand or leave the chat, leave your question in the chat and I'll be happy to read it out, however anyone feels comfortable.
Yeah, also if there's any part of the talk that you all feel like you want to go back to and just kind of tease out a little bit, we could probably do that. But very open and receptive to answering questions as well.
Ready? Well, if no one else has.
I think I would just like to make a comment. Right now, my mind is blown. It has exploded. I think that's great. When the structure that you've been thinking in has been totally decimated within an hour. So, thank you, Nateo, for doing that. I think it's important that we have these experiences actually. So, I will not be looking at things the same when I'm on my nature hikes.
Wow, wow. Yeah, I mean, I hope if anything, this gives you all permission to just like, you know, yeah, be creative and just like so vast in the ways that, you're understanding the worlds around you. We're given these like guides, right? But they are guides, right? Like we have the opportunity every day to look at things differently. I think the last time, or like the one of the first times we had this talk, right? We had someone in the audience be like, you know what? I actually just realized that I never look at a tree and be like, wow, that's a masculine tree. That's like a really manly tree. I just look at the tree and I'm like, it's a beautiful tree. And in that, right, you allow it to be a lot wider in its embodiment, right? Like because you're not putting like a little prison of category around it. You're just like letting it be however it's gonna be. And so I really hope that if anything, this kind of gives you all permission to like kind of like stretch that box out, open the top out, peek your head out, like, see what's going on. But yeah, thank you so much for that, Nancy. Does anybody have questions? Anybody at all? There will be resources going out to you all for just like, right, literature, essays, people, artists that have inspired this talk. So yeah.
I just dropped that resource link in the chat, so anybody can feel free to open that Google document and there's links and things in there provided from Nateo. Thank you.
Did were there any questions on Facebook? No.
No,
Okay.
no,
And
no.
did you read the comment that Brian made?
Yes, Brian did make a comment that along with the cottonwood trees, also poplar trees can be clones.
Poplar trees are so cool. I just feel like the more you learn about poplar trees, the more you're just like, this is amazing. This is so cool. Excellent. Again, folks, like I said, earlier in the talk,
I
if you
think
all are,
I
oh,
think
go ahead.
Aster has unmuted, so
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm afraid to raise my hand because I have the new Zoom, and sometimes when I do a react, it's like very explosive. And I don't know how to tell Zoom to tone itself down. Thank you for the talk. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I guess I have maybe not so much a question, but is the offer for you to expand on an idea, and something I never quite know how to do. Like I get asked these questions a lot, like when we have trees that have male and female flowers, and people are like, what does that mean? And I was like, I don't know, I never really thought about it. That's just how trees are sometimes. And we have flowers that like change sex after they pollinate, and I'm like, yeah, that's just what they do. And I get this question newly, and I kind of don't know what to give the public from that as somebody who often speaks to the public about nature things in what is typically a very short interaction.
So like, I just want to make sure, you know, hearing and like understanding. So like how to answer the question, like why does it do that? Is
I
that
mean, I can answer like,
yeah.
I can answer that question. I get the sense that like people are I mean, people are more aware of ideas of sex and gender and transition, and like that's awesome. And uh but I don't know how to roll that into the, I've sort of had a standard you know rapport for answering these questions for a long time. Um, and yeah, I haven't really thought about how to answer them. When yeah, when people come up, because like it's a tree, it's not a person, it doesn't experience culture, which is obviously an important component of gender. But it is really cool, and it's cool that people are asking, and I want to like encourage the question. I want to be open to the question. I don't want to shut people down. Um, but they've come to me for a nature hike usually, or a museum
Mm,
experience. We're not going on a yeah. So I don't expect you to have like the perfect answer. I offer you to the chance to expand on this idea. I don't know if anyone else is having this experience, and I
yeah.
think it's great. I'm excited for it. I just
Yeah.
haven't figured
Yeah.
out my answer yet.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like less of an answer and it's more of like a conversation that you have to have with folks. You know, it's like a connection moment. Because like going back to the culture bit, right? It's like if like we have to stop thinking about culture as like a human specific thing, right? Because in biology, right, culture means maintaining conditions suitable for growth, right? And like that applies to all of us. Like it does not just apply to like to like one thing, right? Like when we talk about what it means to like expand, and I want to highlight the work of young cultural stewards here, right? But like young cultural stewards do that for people and for youth, right? Is like they go out into the community and they talk about like what does it take to maintain conditions for growth in our communities, right? And so like non-human things do that too. Non-human things have to do that. And so like I feel like whenever questions come like this way, it feels important to make it less of an interaction that's like question and answer. And it's like, let's get into this. Let's talk about this. Let's tease this out. Let's like, like I usually end up asking the person who's asking me a questions, like where does that understanding come from? Like what makes you nervous about like not knowing where this thing, like, so I guess like that's my answer, right? Is like kind of approaching those interactions is less like a Q&A and more like an opportunity to like connect with people to create an opportunity to like expand on something. I don't know if that answers the question. I think we're just like talking at this point,
Oh, that's great.
But that's what I would offer, right? It's like it's less of an answer and more of a like conversation and more of a moment, more of an opportunity for again connecting with somebody who's like experiencing something in a totally different way, like getting their mind rocked, try to like be like, oh, what's up? What's going on? Like, let's talk about it.
Cool. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nateo, for answering that. We've got one more comment just in the chat I want to direct people to that Brian dropped. Says last May, a special issue of Park Stewardship Forum was published on LGBTQIA plus experience and expertise in the outdoors and conservation. And there's some really interesting material in there as well, and a couple of pieces addressing queer ecology with a link. So please, if you're looking for more resources, definitely check out Nateo's doc with all of their resources, plus this link that Brian just shared sounds like really, great information. And honestly, like I always think sharing things forward, like Esther, you mentioned, how do you have those conversations? Supply more information as much as you can. You're not always going to have the answers. And also, I don't always think it's on the, you know, person needing to answer these questions if they're part of that identity or have that, you know, to do all the labor to do that explanation. Like there is science and research and things published to share that information. So educate people along the way. But thank you, Brian, for dropping that link. Thank you, Nateo, so much for this presentation. A couple little notes from Save the Dunes. As always, like Nancy mentioned in the beginning, next week or next month, we'll be taking off from Green Drinks, but stay tuned for August for that. And then on Save the Dunes, we've got our 72nd anniversary open house coming later this month on June 21st from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. here at the Barker House in Michigan City. We'll be doing guided staff tours, light refreshments, history on Save the Dunes, what we've been doing and what we've got coming. And then on the 22nd will be our annual 5K fundraiser in partnership with the Indiana Dunes National Park, the Dunes Dash 5K at West Beach. If you want to walk or hike for a good cause, registration is still open. And it is a great hike. I did the 5K walk the other day and my mind got blown at West Beach, so it can happen anywhere. So that's all from Save the Dunes on our end. Nancy, do you have anything else?
Just a little bit of a preview. This fall, we will be having our annual Monarch Music Fest, which happens in September. That's really a fun event. So, you know, get that on your calendars. I don't remember the date for that, Em. I'm sorry.
Sunday, September 15th.
Okay, it's at a lovely venue and we always have a really great time there, so.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, so thank you everyone
Thank
for
you.
joining us and I hope you have a good night.
Thank you so much, everyone.
thank you, Nateo.
Oh.